You are standing at the edge of a narrow stone passage that hasn't felt human breath in over 3,000 years. The air pressing against your face is not fresh. It is ancient, dense, almost solid, carrying the weight of sealed centuries the way water carries salt, invisibly, completely, and without apology. The forbidden tomb stretches ahead of you in the darkness. And for a brief moment, before you take another step, you understand something that no textbook ever quite manages to capture. This place was never meant to be found. And yet here you are, heart pounding, lungs pulling in air that may contain particles of a world that vanished before your civilization was even an idea. The question isn't whether you're brave enough to go in. The question is whether your body can handle what going in actually means. Most people imagine entering an ancient tomb the way movies taught them to. Torches flickering against golden walls, hieroglyphs glowing with mysterious power, the dramatic sweep of discovery. That fantasy is so deeply embedded in popular imagination that even experienced researchers admit they feel it on the way in, that cinematic pull. And then reality lands. It doesn't land gently. The first thing that truly registers before your eyes adjust or your mind processes the carvings on the walls is the smell. Not dust exactly, though dust is present in quantities that make each breath feel like a transaction. It's something older than dust, a mineral, organic, suffocating compound that sits at the back of your throat and stays there. Dead air, scientists call it. But that phrase doesn't do justice to what you're actually inhaling. You are breathing the decomposed remnants of organic material, ancient fungal spores, the chemical byproducts of 3,000 years of sealed darkness, and trace gases released by the gradual breakdown of resins, linens, wood, and human tissue. Somewhere ahead of you, sealed in layers of stone and ritual, is the reason this passage exists at all. And the body inside has been exhaling its chemistry into this sealed space since before the Roman Empire was a thought. The passage narrows. Your shoulders brush both walls simultaneously, and you realize the builders designed this intentionally. The tighter the corridor, the harder entry becomes. Tombs weren't built for visitors. They were built as permanent barriers between the living and whatever the dead carried with them into the next world. That tension between barrier and threshold is physical. You have to turn sideways. You have to lower your head. In some sections, the ceiling drops so aggressively that movement becomes a slow, controlled crawl. Modern explorers, even trained archaeologists on official excavations, describe this moment as unexpectedly primal. The architecture forcing you into a position of vulnerability before you even reach the burial chamber. The darkness doesn't recede as you move deeper. It thickens. Whatever light source you carry feels increasingly insufficient, not because the beam weakens, but because the darkness here has mass. This is the part no photograph ever conveys, the sensation of light being absorbed rather than reflected. Your skin is reacting before you consciously register why. The humidity in sealed tombs fluctuates in ways that feel counterintuitive. Some passages are drier than desert surface air, stripped of moisture over millennia by the very stones around you, while inner chambers, particularly those near water table levels, cling to a cold, wet pressure that soaks through fabric and settles into joints. Within minutes, your knees ache. Your fingers feel swollen. The temperature drop between surface air and inner chamber can exceed 20 degrees, and it happens gradually enough that your body adjusts without realizing it's adjusting, until you stop moving and feel suddenly sharply cold in a way that has nothing to do with weather. Forensic anthropologists working inside sealed burial sites report that prolonged exposure to that specific cold, still ancient, saturated with particulate matter, produces a fatigue unlike ordinary cold. Your muscles don't tighten the way they do in winter wind. They simply slow. The walls around you are covered, not always in gold, not always in paint, but in intention. Carved symbols, protective formulas, images of gods with animal heads that look entirely different when you are standing 6 inches from them in near darkness, compared to how they appear in museum photographs taken under controlled lighting. Up close, the figures are not majestic. They are urgent. They were carved by hands that believed, without question, that failing to complete them correctly would result in consequences that extended beyond death, beyond the individual, possibly beyond the community. The repetition in ancient tomb inscriptions that historians sometimes describe as ceremonial or decorative reveals itself when you're standing inside the actual space as something closer to desperation. The same protective phrase repeated 40 times across a single wall is not decoration. It is fear made permanent in stone. The burial chamber itself, when you reach it, is smaller than imagination built it. This is nearly universal among people who have entered real ancient tombs rather than reconstructions. The cinematic scale dissolves. The space where a king or priest or noble spent eternity is roughly the size of a modest bedroom, sometimes smaller. The ceiling presses, the walls lean. Everything feels compressed, deliberate, sealed. Objects placed around the burial site, canopic jars, ushabti figurines, food offerings now reduced to desiccated shapes, amulets, ritual tools, sit in the same positions they occupied when the last living person backed out of this room and the entrance was sealed behind them. The stillness is not peaceful. It is structural. Nothing in this room has moved voluntarily in thousands of years. And your presence, your warmth, your exhaled carbon dioxide, your skin cells shedding onto surfaces, all of it is already changing the chemistry of a space that survived intact, precisely because nothing like you was here. Archaeologists working on intact burial sites operate under protocols that would feel absurd outside their context. Sealed suits, respirators, controlled entry schedules designed to minimize the thermal and chemical disruption a human body introduces. The first official excavations of significant ancient tombs before these protocols existed left biological damage that researchers still measure today. Mold blooms triggered by the sudden introduction of moisture from human breath. Pigment degradation caused by shifts in temperature. Structural shifts activated by vibration from footsteps. The act of discovery, at the moment it feels most triumphant, is simultaneously the act of beginning destruction. You are, simply by being inside, accelerating the end of what you came to see. There is something specific that happens to perception inside a sealed ancient chamber that psychologists who study archaeological fieldwork have documented across cultures and locations. Time loses coherence, not in any mystical sense, but in a measurable physiological one. The absence of natural light, the suppression of sound by stone and distance, the saturation of the air with compounds that interact with neurological receptors, all of it combines to produce a mild but real dissociation from ordinary time. Minutes feel stretched. The sensation of having been inside for an hour arrives after 20 minutes. People who have spent extended periods in sealed tomb environments consistently describe a kind of cognitive weight, a heaviness of awareness that feels less like claustrophobia and more like pressure from all directions simultaneously, as though the accumulated significance of the space is something you can physically feel. And then there are the things no one mentions in formal reports, but nearly everyone who has been inside a forbidden tomb acknowledges in conversation. The sound your own heartbeat makes in that silence. The way the light from your lamp creates shadows that move like living things against carved walls, animating figures that were meant to stand guard over the dead, and briefly, for just a fraction of a second, that your rational mind immediately corrects, appearing to do exactly that. The smell of your own sweat mixing with ancient air and producing something that feels profoundly wrong, an intrusion you can smell on yourself. The specific moment when you look back toward the entrance passage and realize how far you've come, how narrow the return path is, and how completely the outside world has ceased to be a sensory reality. Walking back out is its own experience. The passage that felt hostile on the way in feels almost familiar on the return, which should be reassuring but isn't quite. You emerge into surface air, and the difference is so immediate, so sharp, that the first breath of outside atmosphere feels like something being torn rather than given. Your eyes take longer than expected to adjust to light. The sounds of the world, wind, insects, distant voices, arrive with an almost aggressive normality that contrasts strangely with the absolute silence you've been inside. Your clothes carry the smell. It doesn't wash out quickly. Researchers who work extensively in sealed tomb environments describe learning to associate that particular chemical signature with their work, the way surgeons associate certain clinical smells with their profession. It becomes ordinary, but the first time, it stays with you for days. Think about the last time you pushed open a door without thinking. Any door, your front door, a bathroom door, a door at work. You pushed it open, walked through, and the air on the other side was simply there, available, unremarkable, yours without negotiation. In a sealed ancient tomb, the air belongs to something else. It has belonged to something else for longer than your country, your language, and every institution you've ever interacted with has existed. Your right to breathe it was never part of the original design. You are an interruption in an environment that was explicitly constructed to resist interruption, and every system inside that space, biological, chemical, architectural, treats your presence accordingly. The real truth about forbidden tombs isn't hidden in hieroglyphs or buried in academic papers about burial rituals. It's written in the way your body responds to a space that was never designed for the living. It's written in the smell that follows you out. It's written in the specific quality of that darkness, which is not the absence of light, but the presence of something else entirely. Something accumulated over thousands of years in perfect stillness, waiting in a form that has no modern equivalent. History didn't lock these places away to protect secrets. It locked them away because the dead required a permanence that the living, by their very nature, cannot provide. And every forbidden tomb you step inside is a reminder, delivered through cold stone and ancient air, and carved warnings on every wall, that you were never supposed to be there, that you don't belong to that world, and that your body already knows it even when your curiosity doesn't. If there is a place in human history you've always wanted to understand from the inside, not the version polished for museum displays or textbook chapters, but the raw, uncomfortable, sensory reality of what it actually felt like to exist there, drop it in the comments. Every civilization left behind spaces that the official story never quite explains. And those are exactly the places worth exploring without the filter.